Men on the front lines.
Men on the front lines.
Men on the front lines.
We call forth these mighty men of valor.
The Lord put a vision in my heart for a new movement amongst men in the body of Christ.
The Lord says that I'm going to make champions out of those who would gather unto me.
And I believe what men on the front lines will do
And I see it going into the nations.
is going to raise the bar among men. It's time for heroes to arise.
I'm Robert Hotchkin, and this is Heroes Arise. Men on the Front Lines live social media broadcast, equipping, encouraging, and empowering you to arise as the hero, the warrior, and the champion that God created you to be. You matter, you are important, and you have a key role to play for the kingdom in the earth. So thanks for joining me again this week so we can continue to pour into you. We're going to talk this week about a very topical topic. We're going to talk about resist or cooperate. We're going to talk about politics, policies, and the church. As those of you who are following the news here in the United States of America know, we're looking at a potential round of more lockdowns, a potential additional round of lockdowns in several states here in the USA. And that can mean shutting down of churches again or restrictions on churches. So what are we to do? We as churches and we as Christians have a big decision to make. Do we resist? Do we cooperate? Is resisting rebellion? Is cooperation knuckling under? What does it look like to be an active Christian standing for kingdom purposes and values in the earth when that does not agree with the policies of our states or even our nation? I've got a special guest for you this week. He and his church have found themselves at ground zero of this somewhat combustible intersection between church and state. But just before we get into me introducing you to him and getting into this week's topic, I've got a quick announcement for you. Hey, mark your calendar, February 18th through the 20th of 2021. So coming up in just a few months, we've got our Man Camp East Coast event in Rose Hill, North Carolina. We'll be doing it out at Rock Meadows campgrounds, like we have every year for our East Coast event. Join us and be a part of this great group of guys that are gathering together to worship God. There'll be mentoring times, there'll be discipling times, there'll be teaching times, but there's also going to be a lot of fun, a lot of fellowship, and a lot of adventure. I don't know about you, but I am ready to get out and get with a great group of guys. If you're getting a little itchy or cabin fevery from everything that's gone on with COVID-19 and the lockdowns and the restrictions, join us. Get on a plane, get in your car, join us on the East Coast, February 18th through 20 for Man Camp East Coast 2021. You can go to menonthefrontlines.com, click the events link, and you will get all the information about this upcoming event. Or email me, robert@menonthefrontlines.com, and I'll send you the info, I'll send you the links, I'll make it easy for you. All right, I want to jump right into this week's topic, and I am grateful for my guest, Darren Stott.
Robert, good to see you.
Darren, thank you so much for coming here for this show. As I said in the intro, you guys have kind of found yourself at ground zero of this right now rather combustible intersection between church and state. You're the lead pastor of Seattle Revival Center. You are right there in the greater Seattle area. You have been downtown in the midst of the CHOP and Chaz or whatever all it was called when those things were being set up. You took teams out there to bring the reality of the kingdom to those people and into that situation. I love what you're doing with your church, and I know recently you felt the need to take a couple stands, and I want to talk about that because I know you. I know that you're a passionate guy, but I also know you're a kingdom guy and you're not an angry guy. You are a joy guy. You're one of my favorite people. I always laugh when I'm with you, but I also know that the kingdom, the Word of God, and God's plans and purposes and God's people mean the world to you. But I also know, maybe that's a poor way of saying it, they mean everything to you. They mean more than the world to you. But I also know you're very involved in your city. You're very involved in your region. And you care quite a bit about your state, your city, and this nation. So you didn't make the decisions that you made lightly, and I wanted to talk with you to help our viewers, because we might not all be leading a church in a hotbed state like Washington or an area like Seattle, but each of us has a decision to make if we see more controls, more limitations, more lockdowns, and even things like you're not allowed to go to church, you're not allowed to gather together. If you do, you're not allowed to worship, you're not allowed to sing out loud. All those things could be coming. Now, this is not to spread paranoia or fear. This is to have a healthy conversation about what does it look like to stand for kingdom principles when they don't agree with what's going on in our state, our nation. So, Darren, remind the viewers, share with the viewers, I should say, because you've told me, remind me, but share with our viewers some of what you guys have been going through and some of the decisions that you've made.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, everybody is in a difficult spot right now.
Right.
And so in Seattle, it's not that that we have it any worse than anybody else. In fact, I think California is probably the place where the church is really under fire the most. And so I am just applauding and standing in awe of Papa Che on. I'm so proud of Sean Foyt. I feel like he was born for this. I was a part of the first rally that he did in Seattle that was actually located in CHOP. So the very area where the stage was where Charlie Shamp, myself, a bunch of friends, that same area, we saw a young man, as he was rolling a joint, receive a word of knowledge regarding the lack of relationship between him and his mom, where he felt like his mom never loved him. He broke down weeping. He accepted Christ in front of his friends who were also rolling joints. So in that same area where Antifa literally had a camp, with a fence, with multiple tents, like some pretty sketchy people. There was basically Sean set up his band there. We had a Satanist group came in, cursing, like they lined up. They started sending people in. I mean, and so there are a lot of people within the kingdom of God, and they are modeling kingdom, and they're also taking a stand, and it's resonating in our generation. I also just think of like Dr. Rodney Howard Brown. In America, he was arrested for hosting church services. And guess what? It turned out to be one of the best things for him and his ministry. All those charges were dropped. So yeah, it's fascinating to see what's taking place right now. And at the end of the day, I don't think that we're taking a stand against the government, okay? What we are doing is we're remembering that back in the Garden of Eden, in Genesis chapter 3, the enemy came and deceived Adam and Eve, and they rebelled against God. And it says that that God came looking for them. And when God comes into the garden, look, they hid themselves from God. And God says, why have you hidden yourself from me? And they said, because we realized that we were naked, and we were afraid, and we hid ourselves. And so what we need to see, this is the playbook of the enemy, is to use fear, right, in order to insert control. And so I don't see myself as a revolutionary taking a stand against the government at all. I love the government. I'm not a huge fan of politics, but I love our government. But I am a revolutionary against the spirit of fear, against the spirit of control. And I don't care if that's coming in to the culture through politics, media, or even religion,
or even the pulpit. Exactly.
I am going to take a stand against that.
Yeah, that's good.
Anyway, it's good to be here, Robert. Come on, we're going to dive into this.
You're here. And even jumping ahead to another point I wanted to bring up with you, but I love what you said, is I think one of the keys for us, because in the intro, guys, I said, so if we resist, is that rebellion? If we cooperate, is that knuckling under? My whole thought from even what you just said, what I heard was whatever each individual believer and every individual church and the leadership of that church decides to do, I think one of the keys is that whatever decision we're making, making it for something, not against something. We're making it for the kingdom. We're making it for righteousness. We're making it for our people. We're making it for our state, even if we disagree with the policy, because we think staying open, continuing to worship is not just a blessing to us and our people, but it'll be a blessing to the state. So I think one of our keys is realizing we get with God, we get his heart, we get his strategy, but whatever we do, we want to be doing it as much or more for something than against something. Because if I remember correctly from one of our conversations, Darren, early on, you guys did feel to cooperate with your state. And you came up with some really great creative solutions to honoring their suggestions, their guidelines, continuing to serve your people in very creative ways, but not resisting in any way, working under the guidelines creatively. But then something happened, or a series of things happened where you felt, no, we need to take a stand. Tell us a little bit about that. How you originally felt to cooperate, but then what happened where you thought we need to take a stand for our church, for the kingdom?
And now this is a bit of a story, okay?
Yeah.
So if I get long-winded, I know we only got so much time, so you can speed me up or speak up or shut up, right? I can go any direction, so you help me navigate through this.
All right.
But so all of a sudden we find out, so we do a conference, declaration conference.
Yeah.
Bobby stays an extra day, hanging out, doing a bunch of stuff
Bobby
with him.
Connor.
Yeah, Bobby Connor. And we're having lunch, and our team comes in and they say, have you heard the news? We said, no, what news? 7 people have passed away of COVID-19 at the care facility for seniors in Kirkland. Well, Bobby looks up at me, and he just looks up and he's like, and it was just a very interesting look.
Yeah.
It wasn't fear; it was a look of like, it's begun. I mean, there was a real gravity on that moment, and then it just began to build as we found out that the first cases of people dying in our country were taking place in our region. So that began. Our region was ground zero for COVID-19.
Right.
And so all of a sudden, things start. I remember that first Sunday, we were open for one Sunday. After that Sunday, and me just taking a stand against fear. I remember getting up, kind of goofing off. I got to step behind the pulpit with a spray, Lysol, and us Lysol the pulpit, and everybody was laughing. That would be our last. That'd be our last Sunday together for 3 months.
Right.
All right. We got the update. We had 3 days before Sunday. So let's say it's Thursday, and we are being told that we cannot gather as a church.
Okay.
Now we're pretty understanding because we're in the midst of a global pandemic, and we're seeing the projections for the people that are going to die from this disease.
Yes.
So we don't want to kill anybody.
Right, of course.
And so we shut our services down, and we go to a format. And here's the other thing: I didn't want to just host, and this is no diss, for people that are doing church online, but I didn't want to just do that. And the reason why is because I don't personally sit at home and watch entire church services.
All right.
That's just not my cup of tea.
Right,
Other people like to do that.
Right.
So I'm like, I don't want to sit at home with my kids and make them watch an hour-and-a-half church service online. So we did a service that was more like watching Saturday Night Live meet Sesame Street.
I remember, right.
And honestly, that was a way for me to, the way I've always handled stress is to laugh about it, to make jokes about it.
Yeah.
So that was my outlet.
Yeah.
We were laughing.
Right.
But there was elements of we used that to process here.
So for 3 months, you find creative ways to continue to serve your church community. And then let's move forward a little bit. So what I want to emphasize is you guys felt to cooperate. You saw what looked like the seriousness of the situation. It was serious.
Well, let me just say.
Yeah, sure.
They said a couple weeks.
Okay.
They said we're going to shut businesses down. We're going to shut churches down. But this is just going to be a couple weeks until we flatten the curve. That was the big thing in our state.
Right. Okay.
Until we flatten the curve. We're thinking, yeah, of course we could go 2 weeks. And now 3 months later, we're still closed. Now, I remember the day when we're going to get the announcement that we can reopen. We were all gathered around the TV. I was even recording it on my phone. We're going to get the announcement that we can reopen. We're going to celebrate. And so we're going, and our Governor Inslee, says, okay, so now for religious gatherings, you can begin meeting again this weekend outside.
Okay.
And now we're in Seattle.
Right.
We get like 10 days of sunshine a year.
Right.
It's not like here in Arizona.
Right.
And it's still cold.
Yeah.
So now we find it. So we've been closed for 3 months, and now we can gather up to 50 people outside. So now I'm like, forget it. I'm not going to have our people standing outside shivering, like when all of these symptoms of COVID-19 are the same symptoms of having a common cold.
Right.
And then all of a sudden the Lord spoke to me and convicted me and was like, you've got freedom here to gather, and you're saying no because it's inconvenient.
Yeah.
Think about the Christians in China that are like sardines in a can in a hotel room.
Yeah.
So I realized, I'm being a spoiled little millennial right now.
Okay.
We're going to gather, and we programmed 3 services back to back.
Okay.
Up to 50 people.
Yep.
We had a huge tent, and we gathered, and we sang to Jesus. We studied the Word of God. And we shivered, and it was cold, and I should have never wore jeans with holes in them. That was just dumb. Again, for another 4 weeks.
Okay.
And then we were told that we can begin to meet. So now we're so now we're being told that things can open and stuff, and I'll pause and see where you want to go from there.
No, I want to hear. This is all good. So you were trying to cooperate. You are seeing the potential seriousness of the situation. You are dealing with your own flesh reaction by checking in with God on what His solution is. Yet things kind of escalated for you guys where you had to make a decision to even potentially not honor the guidelines that were in place. How did that all come to pass? What shifted from we're going to find ways to serve our people but honor the requests of the governor, and then flash forward for me or fill in that gap?
We've been playing by the rules. We want to be submissive. Try not to be political during a political year. Yes. I know that this is going to be, so I'm really, as we're reopening, I'm always taking people back to the gospel.
Good.
We're studying books of the Bible, all of this. And then we went through a season where we were bullied by our state government to get us to hand over our contact tracing records. So everybody that comes to our service, they all sign a waiver. And the state wanted for us to hand over all of those waivers to them, all of them.
Okay.
And they proceeded to bully us. They proceeded to say that we had to legally. They overwhelmed us with all sorts of legal documentation. Our lawyers reviewed it. They laughed. They said they're trying to overwhelm you with legal documentation, but there's nothing here legally that states that you have to provide them information that you told your members would be kept private and used internally for administration uses only. And so we went through this season with the state that threat, it culminated in them saying if we don't give them what they want, they're going to issue a press release and go public, because we had COVID, people in our church that got COVID, that they were going to go public and call us an outbreak and basically warn the region about us. And that was good news, actually. And the reason why that was good news is because that meant they had nothing legal. They couldn't take us to court. I didn't want to go to court. But if they want to go to the media, that to me was exciting. Our lawyer said, get your press release ready. We got, Sean Foyt's a good friend. He sent me his PR team. Sean Foyt's PR team is ruthless. I don't even know if they're, they hit below the belt.
Well, let me ask you
I don't mean that in a mean way. But
and I haven't asked you this before, and I'm not trying to put you on the spot, but I'm curious. What was your resistance to, at this point, because you've been cooperating, what was the resistance to turning over the information in case any tracking needed to happen? Why did that all of a sudden feel like we need to start drawing a line?
Well, it's easy. We were very, very vocal with our people because of leeriness around this whole COVID thing. That people said it was very important to them that if they sign waivers, if they're giving us information, that information not be handed over to the government.
Great.
So many people asked us that question. If we sign this waiver, will this be handed over? I thought they were paranoid. I really did. I was like, you guys, you're way too into your QAnon and all this stuff. I thought they were just being paranoid. Like, why would the government even want this information? I was like, Governor Inslee doesn't care if you're going to church or not. And so, that was a big deal. Like, you know. And then now all of a sudden, they do want all that. They want everybody. They want email addresses. They want information that we didn't even ask for. And they were bullying us and even threatening to go to go public. So now let me just say that before heading out here to Phoenix. Yesterday, on my way out here, got a text message from a good friend of mine, pastor in Washington State, and he got the phone call yesterday.
Okay.
And they are going through the whole thing with him. Here's the deal: no outbreak in their church, not one case. And the reason why is because one of the neighbors ratted them out and said that they're doing services that don't have social distancing, people aren't wearing masks, and so and they just went into the whole thing with him. So now what we went through in Washington, many other churches and pastors have either went through or are going through right now, which is why I think it's important that we talk about this, because pastors need to know it's scary. Even people that go through the contact, people that get COVID and they get the call, which I think, imagine getting this whole thing is totally fear-based. This whole COVID thing is so full of the demonic. I got good friends that had COVID-19, and with it came an assignment of fear, disappointment, just feeling disqualified, feeling isolated. There's such a demonic assignment on this thing, and I think we've got to have uncensored conversations as the church. And we can't be afraid of being political. We've been told if you're a Christian, if you're a ministry, 501c3, you can't be political. Like we've got to start having conversations to inspire courage that you do not have to give information.
Well, even people who say that, and I say this gently, but my understanding is they're in error, because one of the first things President Trump did in office was he removed the Johnson Act so that we actually are allowed to express opinion about politics and current
We're
events.
allowed, but we've been programmed, Robert.
I hear what you're saying. Okay, all right.
We've been programmed to believe that the pulpit is no place to be political. If you are political, you'll lose your... So we've had years of being programmed saying this isn't allowed. So now all of a sudden we're allowed and we're not doing it.
I do think it's important that as we do this, and I do think we need to do it because we're to invade every sphere of influence, we're to have impact in every sphere of influence, but I do think it's important that as we do it from a kingdom solution standpoint. I don't think the pulpit's a place to rant and rave. I don't, and I'm being serious.
No, I agree.
We can do it about anything. We can, and not just about this, but
that's the place for a podcast.
Right, exactly, right. But we have to be able to, I think we need to be able to address anything that's affecting not just the church, but the world, because we're to bring solutions to those things. So that's even part of my motivation in talking through this today, is let's get these things on the table. Let's look at how you guys responded. Let's look at why. I know you're the first to admit, we learned this. I might change this. I'm glad we did this. So you're in the midst of all this. You get the good PR team. But then I want to fast forward us a little bit more, because recently, the reason I reached out to you is I watched a video you did, because I'm going to have you present the situation so that I don't misrepresent it. But my understanding is Washington made some statement about, even if you gather, you're not allowed to worship, and even if you have a mask on, you're not allowed to sing out loud. And you felt that it was time to take a stand. Because again, if I am correct, they were not making these kind of statements against anybody who was gathering for protests. They were not saying, they were allowing sort of unfettered access to abortion clinics, liquor stores, pot dispensaries, porn places. But for the church, they were saying, we prefer you didn't gather. If you did gather, you are not allowed to do these certain things in it, including even worshiping out loud. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, so corporate worship. You can't say it's illegal, right? Because it's not breaking the law.
Right.
But yeah, and here's the thing. We've taken a stand saying that at Seattle Revival Center, we are going to keep singing to Jesus corporately as a people, and we are going to not redefine what praise and worship looks like in our culture. That stand, I don't see that as a stand against the government. Our governor, he's got some issues. He'll have to stand before the Lord. He'll have to work that out. And so I feel like I understand him. I know why he does what he does. The stand I'm trying to make is a stand in the church. Because there are too many pastors and leaders who have fear in their heart, and now they're becoming theologians, saying like, well, praise and worship isn't, and excuse the voice. I know, I'm not trying to mock. But that's how I process my.
I hear you. I know you, and I know.
To you,
yes,
Robert,
I understand. I understand.
They're saying that praise and worship is not singing, And I get that. Praise and worship is not just singing. It's a lifestyle of obedience before the Lord.
Right.
And yet, going all the way back into early church history, even before Jesus, going back into just our Hebrew roots, singing and corporate singing is an essential part of our faith. It's an essential part of our religion. If we move that out, if we comply in that area, we're simply gathering just to hear a sermon. And so I feel like, the government's going to do it, in this particular case, it is through liberal Democrat governors that are making these decisions. So it is political. And what they are stating is that they really do not see the church as essential. President Trump said the church is essential. But what they're stating through their actions is that Walmart is essential, not the local mom and pop shop. Like, that's not essential. The areas where there's like millions and millions of lobbyist dollars, those are the things like the weed thing. That's millions of dollars. And you have worth of going into lobbying and the legalization of that. And what they're saying is that the church isn't essential. And I disagree. I disagree fundamentally. And I believe that praise and worship and corporate singing is more essential. Let's go with just as essential as a good sermon.
Well, you said, and this is sort of where I want to focus on for a minute, is this idea of we're taking a stand for something, not against something. We're taking a stand for the essentialness of church. We're taking a stand for the essentialness of the gathering together of the saints, because the Bible even says, do not forsake the gathering together of the saints. So we're standing for something. The reason I want to have this conversation, and each of us has to make this decision individually, and every church has to make this decision before God, but at some point, I think we have to say, there are certain things I'm not willing to compromise because I want to take a stand for God, for God's word, for God's truth. Now, we all know in part, so we can all misinterpret, we can all misunderstand. Yet, I think part of the reason the world has gotten as dark as it is, and our nation has gotten as dark as it is, and there is the normalization of wickedness and sin and unrighteousness, the level that there is, and a push for an even greater level, is because we as the church have not been taking stands. And I am not advocating becoming a rabble-rouser church. I am raising the question to each of us, at what point do we decide enough is enough? And I am not telling anybody when that point should be for them, but at some point I think we have to decide, what is this going to look like for me and my walk, for my church and my walk? Not just out of selfishness of, I want to gather and worship, but out of what's going to serve my community, what's going to serve, yes, my church, but my community, my city, my state, my nation, by saying, no, I'm not voting for a pro-abortion candidate, and I am not going to not gather and worship my God. So as I say, for different people, it will be different things. But I think we really have to start looking at this, again, not to rebel, but to see the historic opportunity we have before us. We're in a season of reformation. You can see the reformation the devil wants to bring forth. And it's not about Democrat or Republican. It's about unrighteous, wicked, sinful policies that normalize those things. We need to realize God wants to bring reformation, but we are an expression of that. So what will we agree with? What won't we agree with? And again, not to rebel, but to take a stand, because we have a truly historic opportunity before us to say, this is who I am as a believer. This is who my church is as an expression of the body of Christ in the earth. This is what I believe we need to stand for, when we need to stand for as a, not just church, but as the body of Christ in the nation. Because I even look at things like, if we're really concerned, and I know this is going to be controversial, guys, but I'm just sharing my heart and my processings. I look at like all this concern about, well, we're doing this because we're concerned about life, and COVID can... When we look at what the actual death rate has been, it is a fraction of what we were told it would be, so that so many of us agreed to lockdowns. Now, every single life lost is a life lost. And that's something we need to consider. But what doesn't seem to be talked about much is the number of lives lost to things like suicide because of the effect of the lockdown. Isolation, businesses lost, tension in families. If we're really doing all this stuff for life and for valuing of people and for safety, we've got to weigh that up. And my understanding is it's a much higher death rate from those things than from the actual COVID situation.
Yeah, people are comparing this to, people say, I don't understand what the big deal is with the church. Like, this isn't the first time this has happened with churches. Churches were shut down in 1918 with the Spanish flu, and 50 million people died worldwide. And all right, okay, so we're projected to come in at maybe around 300,000 deaths in America, right? There's no comparison between the Spanish flu and COVID-19. There's just no comparison. All right, now let's look at like deaths, right? 300,000 for our entire country, and this thing's been hitting since January, okay? In our country, I don't know what the numbers are going to be in 2020 for abortion, but it's going to be just under 1 million. Wow. So in our country, we have legally slaughtered, probably around 800. It's going to be around 800,000 babies, not fetuses, but babies.
Yes.
And not one city will shut down for one day because of that.
Wow.
Abortion dwarfs COVID-19, and people don't care.
Wow.
And so that's where I look at the absurdity of what is happening as far as governors basically killing their cities.
Yeah.
And the numbers don't justify it. And that's where I'm saying, Robert, like, what's really going on?
Right.
Like,
okay,
COVID-19 is real.
Yes,
I believe it's a real virus.
Yes.
But what's happening in our country as a result, it doesn't, the math isn't there.
It's not there. So we get back to how do we stand? What do we do? One of the things I want to talk about is, so you may agree with some of what Darren's saying, you may not. You may agree with some of what I'm saying, we may not. That's all okay. We're having the conversation to spur thought so that we're actually seeking things like God's counsel in His Word, God's counsel in His presence. So each of us are considering what's the best thing for us to do as part of the solution. And then we can bring that to our church. But even because COVID's real, and because these lockdowns are real, and because the economic and health and financial and domestic results of all this is real, one of the other things I think about is we did something very similar here. We cooperated with our state. Our governor did list churches as essential, and we decided at the beginning to absolutely cooperate, and we got creative and through streaming media and things as well. Not as creative as you guys did. I really admired what you did. But one of the things that was really impactful to me is the number of people, because our decision was, we'll honor the guidelines, but they were guidelines. They weren't laws that we weren't allowed. They were guidelines. But we decided as a church, as church leadership, we would not turn away anybody that showed up on a Sunday. Wow. We had signs posted that we were honoring all that. We let everybody know. We didn't put out the word that we won't turn anybody away, because we didn't want to encourage that. We wanted to cooperate at first. But every week we had at least a few people showing up. And when we explained our policy, but we said, but if you'd like to come in, you're welcome to. And we did the distances with the chairs. But people said, I need to be in church right now.
That's right. Wow.
I need to gather together. I need hope.
Wow.
And the longer it went on and we were cooperating, the more we heard from our church family. Thank you for everything you're doing online. We appreciate the words of encouragement. We appreciate the messages. We appreciate even that you're broadcasting worship. Thank you that we can gather this way. But I need a hug. I need to be together with my church family. I need hope right now. And that really impacted me. Obviously, it makes me very emotional. It's like, my goodness, this is the most important time for us to come together to encourage and strengthen one another so we can go and be an encouragement and a strength. So that was one of the reasons for me why I was very grateful when we as a church decided to open back up.
Wow.
Because it wasn't even like, I want to make a political statement. It was, if we're truly serving our people, they need hope.
That's so good.
They need fellowship. And some of them, they need a hug. They need contact, and they're not afraid. And if somebody was afraid and didn't want to come, we would reach out by phone or email and say, what can we do for you from here? It was nothing about like, well, if you have real faith, you'll show up. No, it was how can we serve you? And we realized many people needed hope.
Wow, you know what's interesting is the video that we made. So everybody wanted to know, does that mean no more singing at SRC? Yeah. And so I made a video, and it's funny because I did it on my Facebook, and then I shared it on the churches because I was going to be saying some things that weren't necessarily the official position of the church. Yes. And we released it, we shared it, and it just started going viral, and people just started sharing it. And our service that next Sunday was full in both services. As family after family would come up to me and say, Pastor, we're standing with you. And all kinds of visitors and all kinds of people that saw that video. And people are looking for leaders that will lead courageously right now. People are looking for leaders. And if you're watching this and you might not have a title in the church, listen, I believe that every Christian is called to lead. And I think that Jesus treated his followers like leaders. I think that Jesus expected leadership out of all of his disciples. Thinking about Pentecost and the empowerment that took place at Pentecost. Every believer was a minister. And I think that what we're seeing right now, what I'm actually excited about is that there is an awakening that's taking place. There is a revival that's taking place. And I saw this in 2016. 2016, an election year, there's a political revival that takes place every 4 years in our country. Right. People might go, the majority of the time, not caring about politics. Right. During that political year, everybody's passions get aroused again in that particular area. So there's a frequency that's created in our country every 4 years. And what happens is that it actually has a ripple effect. I think there's actually something in the spirit. So we saw in 2016, that's when we went from a 3-day conference to five weeks of extended meetings, and then every single weekend. Well, the terminology that we were using, it was Time Magazine in January of 2016, I believe it was, maybe February, that released the front of Time Magazine had all these pictures of the occult and witchcraft, saying that that they were seeing an awakening in the area of witchcraft. Yeah. And I read that article. They were using the same terminology as we were. Even the term rumble was being used. Really? Well, James Gall had released a word about a West Coast rumble. The West Coast rumble. And they were talking about rumblings, and they're talking about like spiritual earthquakes within the occult. And so one of the things that takes place is that there is a awakening that takes place within the spirit, and it's almost like there's an opportunity for the church. There's also an opportunity in through all these different counterfeit gateways and all these different counterfeit places, and it seems to be tied to this political thing. And so there's an open window of opportunity in the spirit right now for people to say yes to the Lord. Yes. And I believe that this is a time and a season for Christians to get born again. Yeah. And even we're playing a lot with this word renaissance, which means rebirth. It's tied to almost it's tied to revival. It's tied to revolution. And I believe that it's time for Christians to really get rebirth, to get born again, for churches to get born again, for us to get awakened to our faith and intimacy with Christ. So,
well, you know what's interesting to me when I want to circle back to that in just a minute, but when you talked about Pentecost and all of that, what hit me and the leaders that were released, what hit me immediately, I got to thinking about one of the things about Pentecost that I find so fascinating is it's such a victory over fear. And specifically, I'm talking about Peter. Because Peter, actually, we all know the story. He actually denies Jesus 3 times. Why? Because Jesus has been dragged before the Sanhedrin and is being beaten and being put on trial. And Peter's afraid that will happen to him. So he denies Jesus outside of that assembly. He denies Jesus 3 times. One of the Gospels it makes it clear that it's to 2 servant girls. So Big Tough Peter is denied Christ 3 times because he's terrified of being brought before the Sanhedrin. Now, Pentecost comes in the book of Acts. The very people that Peter stands up and addresses is that same body, where he says, Do whatever you want to me. I am going to tell you about what you did to Jesus, but I need you to know what he's done for you. So the first thing we see that happened at Pentecost is this amazing victory over fear to the very people that Peter had been terrified of, so that he denied Jesus 3 times. Now he stands up to share Jesus with them. Not beat them with the gospel, but to share the gospel with them, because the first thing that happened when that fire of God hit was they got set free from fear. So I think it's important that we be aware, not only like we talked about, because we're going to talk about here in a second about what does it look like to resist, but not resist the flesh or in the flesh, but to take a kingdom stand in these historic times because we have such an incredible opportunity. One of the things we need to be aware of is, like we said, are we railing against something, or are we taking a stand for something? Are we operating out of faith for our state and nation, or are we afraid of what might happen to us if we do? And then what I want to circle back to now, kind of where you were leading us, is part of what God wants to do is set us free from every manifestation of fear. So we're not denying Christ, whether literally or metaphorically, but taking a stand for him, including taking a stand for him, not to rail against the state, but even for our state, for our governors, for our legislature and executive and judicial branches, for our nation. But one of the things I've heard you talk about, which I thought was such an interesting insight when we're talking about what does resistance look like as a Christian right now, you talked about how what we're told in the gospel is, blessed are the peacemakers, not the peacekeepers. Talk a little bit about that.
I think a lot of people, when they think of the concept of peace, and if they think of Jesus as a peacekeeper, they've got this hippie view of Jesus with feathered out hair, walks around with Birkenstocks, right. Has very interesting stories. There were 2 men in the, and versus. We go to this John Lennon kind of hippie style of like, no war, man. Like,
yeah.
Let's like,
let's keep the peace. Let's keep everything okay.
Give peace a chance. And that is not.
Jesus is the Prince of Peace.
Yeah, Jesus is not the Prince of hippie peace.
Right.
Right. That our understanding of peace is no war.
Yeah.
That's not the Hebrew understanding
right.
of shalom.
Right.
Which the Hebrew understanding of shalom is flourishing in every category and area of life. That life is functioning the way that God originally intended for life to function.
Yeah.
Now, if you have an area where, let's say you're blind and you can't see, well, the Hebrews would understand that is a loss of physical peace, because everyone knows that eyes were created to see. So when Jesus healed the blind eyes, what Jesus was doing was he was executing justice and bringing, he wasn't suspending the natural order of things. He was restoring it. Why? Because eyes are created to see.
Yes.
That's peacemaking.
Yes.
That peacemaking is when we find any area of injustice where sin has brought fracturing, where people have been convinced that less than God's best is the new normal. We have to step into that and say, absolutely not. As a generation, we will settle for nothing less than God's very best. Yes. We want to see what John G. Lake talked about as far as ideal Christianity, which are that we are like Christ clones, that people are accusing us of, you're just trying to be like Jesus. Exactly, which means that those blind eyes bother me, and they should bother you.
Yes.
And so I see resistance as the body of Christ saying that we will not be peacekeepers. Why aren't you just going to go with the flow? I don't want to say it because I don't want to offend anyone. Well, what about Jesus? People have got this whole thing that a Christian man is a nice guy.
Right.
Jesus was not the nice guy. Like people say, well, Jesus wept. Yeah, but he wasn't a crybaby.
Right.
Jesus leaned in and he empathized and he entered into that place of emotion because he's a priest and he had his Father's heart, but he wasn't using emotion to manipulate.
Wow.
He wasn't using emotion to whine.
Yeah.
We've taken all these terms and all these different things like love, like a Christian has to be loving. Well, what about Jesus when he went into the temple and started literally whipping people and throwing people's book tables all out of whack and strangling chickens and whatnot? Like that wasn't very loving, and yet and yet if you look at Jesus, God, he was still love. It's, you see, we've got these American ways of how we define things.
Yes.
And we've got this, and we've been taught that a Christian does not rock the boat. We've been taught that a Christian is one who just complies. And if the government says it, then that's okay. That's how it is. That we submit to the, we forget, it's Christmas time.
Right.
We're celebrating Christmas. And we realize that baby Jesus became a man, lived, died, and resurrected when King Herod wanted baby Jesus dead,
Right.
when the government was killing all the Hebrew boys
Right.
in order to assassinate the Son of God. Mary and Joseph didn't just say, hey, let's just comply.
Wow.
I mean, like, we're
Right.
supposed to submit to the government,
Wow.
so we're just going to offer
Wow.
our baby to be killed by the government.
Wow.
No, Mary and Joseph, they had a responsibility to protect that child, and they did not submit to the government. They did not honor the
Wow.
government. They honored what God had said to them to protect this child and to raise this child. And it's time for us, even at Christmas time, to remember that, like, Christianity is not a religion of compliance.
Right.
Christianity is full surrender and submission to our true King. That's great. I'm a citizen of the United States. Hey, I'm grateful. I really am. My allegiance goes to the King,
Yes.
his righteousness, and to his kingdom
Yes.
before it does to the red, white, and blue flag.
Yes, I agree. And you know, we're talking about peace and peacemaker, peacekeeping. And when you were sharing about that, John 20 came to mind, which is one of my favorite passages whenever we're dealing with anything of fear based on what the ruling body wants to do. And you guys have heard me talk about this a lot, so I'll be quick, but I think it's an important point to reiterate in this context. In John 20, it says that the disciples were literally and metaphorically locked up in fear. It says they were behind locked doors because they were afraid of the leaders of the day.
Wow.
They were afraid what happened to Jesus that they didn't fully understand yet was going to happen to them. So right in John 20, verse 19, it says they are behind locked doors because they were afraid. Jesus, the victorious risen Lord, steps through the wall and says to them, "Peace be with you." Now, if we don't look at that word in the Greek, we could think it as Jesus basically showing up and saying, chill, bro, it's going to be okay. That word in the Greek, you talked about the Hebrew word shalom, and that's absolutely right on. The Greek word there is irene. One of the definitions of what Jesus is saying, I have come to bring you irene, one of those definitions is this. One of the definitions of irene is this: the blessed state of a devout and upright man after death. So Jesus is saying, I am releasing the grace to die to yourself so that you can come fully alive in me. I am releasing the grace to you to die to fear, to die to anything of the flesh that would limit you from walking in the fullness of what I'm empowering you to be as a dominion steward in the earth, to go out there and change the world with and for the gospel. So that could be fear. That could be anger. Unrighteous anger. It could be discouragement. It could be despair. It could be feeling powerless. Jesus wants to release peace right now so that we are peacemakers, not peacekeepers, so that we are releasing the authority, the principles, the will, and the way of the Prince of Peace. And maybe it's through prayer. I know people, I actually was contacted by somebody months ago saying, when we launched our Firewall USA effort back in July, a leader in another country reached out to me and said, I trust you that I can have this conversation with you without you judging me, but I'm wrestling right now with everything going on. Do you really think prayer can make a difference? And I said, absolutely, I do. I understand where you're coming from, but I think that God is waking us up so we do things like pray. He's reminding us that we have blueprints like 2 Chronicles 7:14. If we humble ourselves, if we pray, if we seek His face and His strategies and His thoughts and His will and His ways, and we turn from our wicked ways, even before we yell at our nation to turn from its, He will come and heal the land. And I said, here's the big thing I want you to take away from this. You obviously have a key role to play in this prayer movement if the enemy's trying to discourage you this much. So right now you need to die to that discouragement and become part of God's solution, and consider making one of the main things you do every day is praying into this situation. So we can feel powerless, but that's a lie of the enemy too. If we're simply decreeing and declaring the word of the Lord, like I put out decrees over the election. It wasn't for a party. It wasn't for a candidate. I simply was putting out scriptural decrees that truth and justice and righteousness would prevail in our election and in this nation. What Christian wouldn't want to pray that? Wouldn't want to declare that? That's not about getting somebody unelected, re-elected, turning things. It's about saying we want righteousness, truth, and justice to rule and reign in our land. That's powerful. But if we get discouraged, if we get afraid, we get locked up. So that's when we need to realize, first we receive from the Prince of Peace, and that starts by dying to any flesh-based carnal reaction. Fear, discouragement, despair, depression, definitely anger, frustration, anything that takes us out of coming fully alive in Him in this moment so that we can see truly historic, epic things happen for the gospel. That includes true reformation for the nation. And so again, we're not standing against the nation, we're actually taking stands for the nation in deciding how to react to these situations.
Yeah, that's so good. That's really, really good. You know, with the whole not singing, and that's not really praise and worship, you know, right. I think it'd be good for us to even hit on another part of what resistance, I believe, looks like. And that is that we don't fall into this Facebook theology. There's a very popular meme that says, I don't go, there's the voice again. Yeah, I'll just go there. I don't go to church.
Right.
I am the church.
Right.
And part of the resistance right now is that God is doing an assembling.
Right.
That there is an assembling of the dry bones that are starting to come together.
That's right.
And that God is building an army right now. And that's uncomfortable,
right.
because armies go to war.
Right.
We're not going to fight for victory. We'll fight from victory.
Yes. Right.
But here's the thing. If you want to be a part of what God is doing, you're not going to be doing it alone.
That's right.
Because if you are in isolation, that's a huge theme this year. Be safe, isolate.
Yeah.
And if to the degree that we isolate, we won't be able to truly partner with what God is doing. Now, does that mean that you actually have to physically be in the building with other? Not necessarily. You're part of a vulnerable population.
Right.
Your doctor said, listen,
right.
it's very important that you
Absolutely.
just wait until maybe the spring or whatever, but you can still connect. And I think it's really, really important that we are, as a people, listen, if you are healthy and you're in isolation, God is calling for you in this season that there is an assembly. God is building an army in this time, and it's time for you to find your battle buddies. It's time for you to be a part of what I strongly believe that we in this time need to be part of apostolic communities. We need to be a part of communities that honor the office of the apostle, the prophet, the pastor, the teacher, and the evangelist. And Robert, I'm sorry, I hope this isn't offensive, but if people are just a part of the thing where they go to a church just like they go to a movie theater, and there's nothing being expected out of them, it's feeding this consumeristic American Christianity. I don't believe that's really going to last. And I believe that we have to enlist in a body. It could be a small, it could be a home church, it could be whatever, but that we honor the offices, we're connected, there's no isolation. And that there is an agreement that once we're connected, Paul would say, the church is like a body. Mm-hmm. There are many members with various functions. But if you're alone, you're not the church. You're just a collarbone. You're just a bone. There is an assembly, and we have to partner with that. God's not going to pick you up. And we've got to say yes to the Lord and make a fresh covenant to community. So my point is this, in a sentence, taking resistance looks like fresh covenant to community in this time.
That's good. And I think that's important to realize that we're stronger together than apart. There's a reason God says, do not forsake the coming together, the gathering together of the saints. Yes, it's absolutely so we can be filled. The church is a filling station. But why do you go to a filling station? So you can go out into the world further, farther, faster. So we come to get filled. We are stronger together than apart. That's important to realize. But we also have to see that we're going to, one sets 1,000 to flight, 2 10,000. So yes, we can gather together in the Spirit. We can gather together on Zoom. We can have prayer meetings on Zoom. I've led prayer meetings on Zoom. There's no time or space in the Spirit. That does work. But we also need to realize if we're at a point where we're looking, let's just talk for our nation in the USA. And I know we have viewers from all over the world that watch, and I'm so grateful for all of you. This applies to your nation too. But right now we're seeing an opportunity in our nation where a lot of dark darkness is being exposed. A lot of machinations of the enemy are being exposed. And I don't mean the enemy, the Democratic Party or this party or that party. I'm talking about the Luciferian agenda to turn this nation away from God is being exposed. The network, the scaffolding, the schemes, the scams are being seen. So we are in an opportunity to tear down strongholds of powers and principalities, giants in the land. I look at Elijah. We were talking about this at lunch. I look at Elijah on Mount Carmel, proof that one man, one woman, one believer is always in the majority with God. So by no means are we saying if you're not gathering together, you're powerless. Anything but. If you are allied with Jesus Christ, you are in the majority. And Elijah proves it. The entire occultic power structure of the Asherah and Baal prophets are wiped out that day. Yet, what's interesting to me is when then God decides, now I'm going against the power and principality of Ahab and Jezebel. What does he do? When Elijah is not able to come into a place of unity, he's still in that mindset of, I'm the only one, I'm the only one. God brings him home to heaven to enter his reward because he's been a true champion, a true warrior, and has done great things with and for God. But what does he have him be replaced with? 3 people, a unity. He says, go and anoint Elijah, and go and anoint Jehu. And I always forget the third king. It's like Hazael or something. But he says, for the next move where we're going to actually tear down the powers and principalities in the land, I am going to put a unity in place, a gathering together where 3 will work on my behalf. And I think that's a prophetic picture of where we are right now. And I think it's one of the reasons it's very important that if we can, we do take a stand for the gathering together of the saints. Because we don't want to be the army of God cowering on the sideline while Goliath struts around. Because even if we are, God's going to find David. He's going to find a man or a woman who's willing to be a David, who's willing to take on the giants in the land, and then is willing to rally that army. And that's who you're made to be. You're made to be that David. You're made to be part of the army that's rallied. We war not against flesh and blood. We war not against our states or our governors or our councilmen or our aldermen. We war against the powers and principalities of darkness that are trying to turn this nation away from God, because we're being presented with an absolutely amazing and historic opportunity to co-labor with God and each other. So to see real reformation come, to see this nation turn back to God, but also to pray together, believe together, to work together, to invade spheres of influence together, to make room for God to come and heal the land in his sovereignty. So Darren, any last bits of wisdom you want to share about what it looks like to resist in this hour and take a stand for the kingdom?
Absolutely. And I just got this picture, and the picture is, do you remember when when COVID first hit? It caught really off guard as far as the escalation of it, how quickly. Do you remember the news shots, watching on the news of all the cruise ships that were out at sea that could not come in because of all the people on those cruise ships with COVID-19? And that was like, they called them ghost ships. This was happening during Easter. During Easter, you had the ghost ships, all these cruise ships that had been, okay, the church has had a cruise ship mentality. I don't know if you've ever seen like any cruise ship commercials on TV. You got like a drone shot or helicopter shot. You got all these people. They're walking around with drinks. They're sitting by the pool. They're just like this. This is great. And we have seen our cruise ships become ghost ships. We have seen this like, I don't want to go to that cruise ship anymore. Why? They don't have good coffee. I'm going to this cruise. Like, why are you going to this cruise ship? I was done with that cruise ship. I'm not being fed at that cruise. If I'm going to get on a cruise ship, it's got to have a buffet. I've got to have steak and lobster, and they just wanted to do like sushi. I'm so done with sushi. I need steak. I need margaritas. And we've had this cruise ship mentality. Guess what? Our cruise ships have turned into ghost ships. But there is a ship that's been functioning this entire time, battleships. And when you look at a battleship, every person on the battleship has a function, has a role to play. People aren't strolling over battleships with their big bellies hanging over, with margaritas. Hi! No. They've got an assignment.
Wow.
They've got a call.
Yeah.
They've been trained.
Wow.
And I believe that, man, the church has got to change, bro. We've got to go from, this is the place to get filled up. No. Like, it needs to look more like boot camp.
Wow.
This is like, we're here to see your dreams come true. Things Jesus never said.
Right.
What's
Right.
your dream?
Right.
Jesus said, hey, if you want to follow me, lay everything down. Like, Jesus didn't do a gifts assessment. Jesus said, lay everything down, follow me.
Yeah.
Take on, like, I'm your new rabbi. I'm not going to tell you where we're going. Wow. I'm not going to give you a schedule. Wow. You're going to have no idea. This is going to be the most terrifying thing. Hey, if you're willing to lay your whole life down and follow me, then you can. I'm inviting you. And I think, like, C. Peter Wagner, he prophesied a church quake. Mm-hmm. And this is what we're in. And this has nothing to do with, my church is taking, they say we don't have to wear masks. People need to grow up. Yeah. Like the mask thing, the I'm not going to allow your laser temperature thing to go on my head because that's part of the Antichrist and the anti. Like no. God's trying to say, hey, church, wake up. Yeah. Like, wake up. Yeah. Like the church is not where you go and get your nails done. God has called you and created you for such a time as this, and He is building an army, and you are needed. Yes. You are needed.
Yes.
And what are you doing now, dude? I am pleading with the audience, saying there is more. Yes. There is more. There's encounters in the Spirit. There's heavenly adventures that we can go on. There's lives that will be changed. Yeah. But we've got to lay down this system, this thing that we've been doing, calling it church, and looking at what's happening with all the statistics and all this stuff. And then what does the church do? We shake our little fist at the government. We say it's the problem with the poor, the problem with there not being abortion alternatives. That's the government's fault when it's actually all of these areas of radical injustice because the church has advocated. The church said, our cities need hospitals, so churches provided the first hospitals. The church said our children need education, and so the church hosted education. And now churches don't have schools, and we're so mad about the sex ed bill because of our public schools, when the church just said, hey, it's not our responsibility to educate children, it's the government's job. And so it's so easy for us in this time to be like, the government. No, like I'm saying, the church. Yeah. The church.
That's good.
And we've got to, as leaders, Darren, leaders, Robert, we have to take responsibility and say it's the church's job to educate. It's the church's job to figure out medical and health care. It's the church's job to figure out entertainment. We're not taking dominion over mountains. We're not going and saying, we're going to take it over. No. We're going to say, like, we are going to not change the culture. We're going to create a new culture. Yeah. And it's going to be vibrant. It's going to have the kingdom of God. God's going to unroll scrolls. We're going to have new technology. We're going to have all this stuff. We're actually going to get degrees again. Yeah. You know, we're going to show up to work on time.
Yes.
And I'm telling you, this is what revival looks like. Right. It's the Spirit of God. It's the awakening. It's the fire. It's the boldness. It's not just on Twitter or Facebook putting out our little comments of like, you know, why do you talk so much, Robert? You know, it is us actually taking responsibility for our own lives, our breath, our relationships, and actually leaning into the injustice and saying there will be justice through my contribution.
Yes. I mean, we talk about it, guys, that we are to be solution bringers and difference makers. Darren is saying that's what resistance looks like. Much more than railing against something or even definitely more than complaining about something, it's saying, okay, God, we're seeing a situation. Help me see how I can bring a solution, how I can make a difference. And remember what God says in His Word, do not despise the days of small beginnings. I know what we've done in Cambodia. And, you know, it can be one child at a time, one woman at a time, and all of a sudden it's 2 or 3. You know, compared to some works, ours is tiny, but lives have been changed. Wow. What does God have for you to do? I'm telling you, is great things for you to do, exciting things for you, innovative things for you. If you see a need, if you see a challenge, ask the Lord I want to give a shout out to Robert Kelly, one of our men on the front lines. He is always coming to our man camp events and he rallies guys to come. He realized his community had a need, Darren. Then it was not only in the church, but he's brought church solutions to business, and he's built a successful business that his main focus is when guys come out of prison to give them work. but not only so they can make a living, but then they can be discipled in that work to be reminded of the great worth and value they have as men. He has seen lives transform. Why does he do that? Because he came out of prison once. And nobody could, so he started his own business, and God has blessed it. Now he employs dozens and dozens of men. So he brought kingdom solutions to business. He brought kingdom solutions to the problem of guys coming out of prison not being able to find work. And then he looked around and said, you know what? I'm going to run for local office, because all the things we're seeing on a national level started on a local level. So I'm not going to complain. I'm not going to murmur. I'm not going to shake my fist. I'm going to run for office. Awesome. And we're still waiting to find out in California if he was elected or not. There's still, with all the voter recounts.
They're having some counting problems.
They are. They're having some math problems. But one of the things I've told him, I said, no matter what happens, I'm proud of you because you've learned from this, and you decided, what can I do to be part of the solution and to make a difference. Right. And even if by chance he doesn't get in, I'm believing he will, he's learned from it, and if he feels to again, he'll be even more effective in the next run. But even saying I'm taking a stand to bring kingdom solutions into local government, part of the victory is making the choice to take the stand. So that's a lot of what resistance looks like right now. And again, the last thing I want to say, for me, one of the main things you can do to be part of the kingdom resistance is to refuse to be a victim.
Wow.
No matter what happens, refuse to be a victim. Because in my 1996 New Living, which is out of print, but it's my favorite, in 1 Peter 5:8, it says it like this: the enemy roams about like a lion looking for a victim he can devour. Most translations say looking for someone to devour. I love this translation because it says he devours victims. It doesn't say if difficult things happen, even if the enemy launches, we become victims. It says no, if we take on a victim mindset, we can be devoured. Jesus showed up as the Prince of Peace, the victorious risen Lord, to release Irene, because the disciples, for a moment, had taken on a victim mindset and were behind locked doors afraid. If you're wrestling with any fear, discouragement, despair, anger, I've wrestled with anger at moments in all of this. I get with God and I say, Lord, I release that to you and I receive your Irene. Help me die to that so I can come fully alive with you and be part of your solution, because that's what you're meant for in these historic times. Darren, where can people find more from you, hear more from you, connect with you at Seattle Revival Center? Let them know.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's just my name, Darren Stott. So go to darrenstott.com and put your email in so that you can see everything that we're creating. We're doing a lot. I got to say this, Robert. Revival Chickens. Okay, it's Christmas time. If you subscribe to any sort of music streaming devices, Spotify,
Your
iTunes,
kids did this, right?
music. My kids have a band.
Awesome.
They're called the Revival Chickens. They have a new Christmas album out. It's on all the streaming platforms. So just search Revival Chickens. Follow the Stars, their Christmas album. If you have kids, that is a good time. Your kids are going to love that album. They wrote a lot of the songs. In fact, Follow the Star, they wrote that song completely. The verses, the chorus, everything. So, but darrenstott.com, okay? Also, SeattleRevivalCenter.com.
Darren, thank you for being my friend.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Thank you for what you're feeling to do. Thank you for how you're doing it. And thank you for raising up others. I love you. I'm proud of you. And I'm grateful you're my friend.
I love you too, man. This has been fun.
Thank you so much for being with us for this episode of Heroes Arise. Don't forget, February 18 through 20, gather with more champions like you. Come and join us for Man Camp East Coast 2021. Any questions, go to Men on the Front Lines, click the events link. All our wonderful sisters who are watching, great Christmas present for your husband or your brother, or if you have a male pastor, your pastor, or if you have a son who's an adult, send your son. We see so many lives changed and transformed. We see lifelong friendships made. Man Camp East Coast, February 18th through the 20th in North Carolina. menonthefrontlines.com, click the events link, or just email me, robert@menonthefrontlines.com. Thank you so much for being with us for this episode of Heroes Arise. Go out there, make a difference. Go out there, be part of the solution. We'll see you back here next week.